skills are only helpful if you're using them and you're held accountable to them. And we ask our teen clients to use a diary card, which is like a daily tracker of what skills you're using and what emotions you have. And so I'm always asking that parents go first. If you're asking your child to do something, then you need to be willing to do it as well.
Welcome back to the You Need a Counselor podcast. This is a show presented by Heart and Solutions Counseling Agency. We release new episodes every Sunday at 5 p.m. Central and encourage you to batch up that laundry, put away the dishes, plan for the week ahead, or do any other task that might seem daunting while you give our show a listen. You might just be encouraged to call your therapist, connect with this week's guest, or seek out those services you've been considering for a while but haven't made the commitment to yet. If you are in the state of Iowa and are in need of mental or behavioral health counseling, give us a call at 1-800-531-4236. Enjoy the show.
Welcome back to the You Need a Counselor podcast. My name is Dr. Julie Johnson. I'm the president and founder here at Heart and Solutions, Mental Health Counseling and Behavioral Health Counseling here in Iowa.
And I'm Krista Hunt. I am our Vice President in charge of the Behavioral Health Department. And this is our podcast, You Need a Counselor. So we are a podcast designed for people curious about counseling, but have barriers keeping them from experiencing the benefits of counseling. Our mission is to share stories about counseling, good, bad, and indifferent, and spread the message that everyone can benefit from mental health and behavioral health counseling services.
Our guest today joins us from Pennsylvania. We've got Katie K. May here with us today. Katie is a licensed therapist, an author, a speaker, and owns a group practice. She is the founder of Creative Healing, which is a teen support center in Philadelphia. She's also the author of You're on Fire, It's Fine. So welcome, Katie. Thanks for being here. Good to have you with us.
Thank you. I'm excited to dig in today. I appreciate you having me.
Wonderful. So your center, Creative Healing, has multiple locations, and you work directly with teens. What kind of support services are you offering there?
Yeah, so we work with teens and their parents, and primarily we work with high-risk teens. So those that are engaging in self-destructive or life-threatening behaviors, typically we're trying to either keep them out of the hospital or we're receiving them from a hospital stay so that we can help keep them stable, keep them in their lives, use their coping skills, and really create and live a life that they love, that they don't have to escape from or use really harmful coping skills in order to try and white-knuckle through.
Awesome. And is it like typical therapy sessions, or is it more like groups, or what kind of services do you guys do there?
All of the above. So we have a comprehensive DBT program. DBT is dialectical behavior therapy. It's a structured program that teaches skills and also helps folks accept and manage their really big and painful emotions. And so what that looks like for us, because we work with teenagers, is we do individual therapy with teenagers. We do skills groups with teenagers, but because teenagers live with families and caregivers, we also do skills groups for caregivers so they can learn all of the skills to both model and mirror what teens are learning, but also to respond to them more effectively so they're not escalating crisis at home.
Now, sometimes when parents hear about DBT and they hear that acceptance part, sometimes there's a sense of, well, I don't want to accept these behaviors, or I don't want my teenager to be accepting of these behaviors. So can you walk us through kind of how you explain that and how you talk that through with parents and caregivers?
Absolutely. I love that question. I think there's two separate parts of it for me. So there's one part that's like validating emotional experiences, which I think that caregivers have a lot of trouble with. They fear that it's feeding into the emotion or condoning the behavior. So what we really talk a lot about is that validating someone's emotion is different than saying your behavior is okay. So I can understand that if a teenager is experiencing emotions and they're big and they're overwhelming, I call them fire feelers. It's like they're on fire with their own emotions. It's this big, overwhelming, painful, all-consuming experience. So if you can think about it that way, like my child is on fire with their emotions, then I can make sense of how that might lead their brain to some kind of escape solution like self-harm or suicidal ideation or some other big, scary behavior. And so when we look at it through that lens, we can help parents to validate, to say, I can see how hard this is for you. I can see how painful and how much you're struggling. And yet I don't want you to hurt yourself. So let's work together and get you the right support and get you more healthy and helpful coping skills and behaviors. So that's the validation side of acceptance.
And that kind of goes along with your book title, You're on Fire, It's Fine. So I'm guessing it
Yes.
kind of goes into those fire emotions. Can you give us a little bit of like info on what that book is about?
Yeah, so it is. That's where the title comes from, is this idea that we're on fire with our emotions, and that the environment, caregivers, coaches, teachers, siblings, grandparents, are often saying things like, you're being too sensitive. It's fine. Like, just go take a walk. Maybe you need a snack, or go sleep on it. You'll feel better. So these messages of dismissing, minimizing, invalidating, or giving simple solutions that make someone who's on fire with their own emotions feel like, well, is it fine? Like, can I really trust my own emotions? Is there really a simple solution and it just doesn't work for me? There must be something wrong with me. So we talk about in the book and in my work, we talk a lot about the different parts of that. One is parent being able to accept and use their own skills. So I, as a parent, need to be able to recognize when I'm wanting to dismiss an emotion because I feel frustrated or I had a tough day and I don't need another thing on my plate and it's hard to hold. So noticing how I'm feeling and how I'm reacting, and then also learning the skills to respond to my teenager in a way that's going to make them feel seen and heard and want to come to me for support rather than feeling shut down, and getting the message that maybe mom, dad, parent is not the right person to share my big, scary emotions with because they keep telling me that it's not the right emotion or it's not the right time for it.
Yeah, and I love that example of, those emotion feelings being painful and being time sensitive, right? As though we are on fire, and the things that we might do if we're on fire might be dangerous things in another situation. So if I'm on fire and I go jump into the deep end of the pool, that's something that, hey, maybe on a normal day when I'm not on fire, I wouldn't want to jump into the deep end of the pool. That might not be the safest thing to do. But if I'm on fire, I'm going to jump into the deep end of the pool because that is the safest thing to do if I'm literally on fire. What are some other of those not so helpful coping strategies that somebody might see from the outside and go, why would we do this? But that are actually serving that adolescent or teenager?
Yeah, I love your visual of jumping in the deep end of the pool, like anything to put that fire out, right? And so that's what these behaviors become. So we see cutting or self-harm, we see suicidal behaviors, which includes making suicidal threats in person and on social media and otherwise. Drug and alcohol use numbs out. I would say that's one of those behaviors that makes the fire a little less hot. Like, it's still there, but we can numb out from it, or we can put up a protective layer from it. Binging, scrolling endlessly on your phone. And then there are some other behaviors that look different in terms of the life-threatening nature or the self-destructive nature, but add to that self-destruction. Which, if you think about, if somebody's on fire, there's no shades of gray. It's no like, I'm kind of on fire. They're either on fire or they're not. And so we can understand that through people's thinking patterns. When they're in very extreme emotions, things do become all or nothing. Nobody loves me. I'm never going to have a good or happy life. Everything is terrible. My life is horrible. So those are the kinds of thoughts that start to come up for a person who's on fire, which then leads to relationship patterns that are also destructive, either lashing out, engaging in conflict with people, or the other end of that, opting out of relationships before they have the opportunity to be rejected or abandoned. And so because they have these self-destructive behaviors and then these all or nothing thinking patterns and these difficult relationships, they also don't like themselves very much. They feel worthless. They feel like others don't like them. They're not really sure who they are. And so they struggle with identity and self-worth as well.
And you mentioned you work specifically with like high risk teens. Can you give us some examples of like reasons? I know you said some have come from the hospital or trying to avoid going to the hospital. If someone's listening, like, what are some examples of behaviors that a teen might show that would show that they are high risk?
Oh, yeah. So the majority of my clients are self-harming or suicidal, chronically depressed clients. That's just kind of my sweet spot for what I tend to work well with. But as a whole in my center, we'll see a lot of eating disorders. So binging, restricting. We also see a lot of school avoidance, which is one of those very quality of life interfering or life disruptive behaviors. It's not necessarily like high risk, but it's not helping them move forward in their everyday life. So school avoidance. We also see some running away behaviors, or, really lashing out or engaging in these big conflict or outbursts when they're upset. So conflict at home, that sort of thing. and some substance use as well. So all of the examples of things that come from being on fire are these self-destructive and impulsive behaviors that in the short term make things easier because they bring the emotion down quickly, but in the long term make life a lot harder and have a lot of consequences.
Yeah, certainly the way that feelings are expressed are going to look different between children and teenagers. And part of that, too, aside from brain chemistry, is also the freedom that teenagers have that children do not have. There are more ways, more options of those feelings to be able to come out and express themselves than might be available to a child. In terms of treatment, how does that look different when you're working with a teenager versus a child?
Yeah, so if I were working with a child, and I used to do play therapy, so I would say it's more through the language of play and art and expression that their stage of brain development does not lend itself well to being very concrete and literal in what my experience is right now. And let's dig into that and talk about that and understand what's contributing and what's keeping it in place. Whereas most of the time with teenagers, that is the work that we're doing. And we still do expressive arts and activities and find ways to help teens express themselves when words are not enough, because often they're not. And I would say, especially for our neurodivergent teens, words are often not enough and we need other ways to express. And it's super helpful to have those bottom up and expressive strategies. But the majority of our work is understanding the patterns of teens. So what led up to that behavior? What were you feeling in your body? What was going through your mind? What was happening around you in the environment? Who else was there? How were you feeling during it? How were you feeling after it? And what else happened after it? Did you get a lot of warmth and attention from parents? Did you get a lot of relief and you were able to cry and get things out that before you didn't feel like you could cry? So we're understanding why behaviors are happening, what the function is of them, basically like how is it helping you, even though it's actually also harming you.
And you do groups with parents too. And I know at our agency, our behavioral health department, we go in home and work with parents and the children too. And sometimes that is the big struggle, is getting like parent participation as well. How is that at your agency? Does it seem to... Do parents actively participate? Is it sometimes harder even to get like teens to talk to their parents and get them involved in those groups together?
So they're not in groups together, which I think makes things work better from my opinion. I know a lot of DBT groups, they do multifamily. They have parents and teens together and we've intentionally separated them out. So the first part of your question, like how is it to get parents engaged, is it's a part of our process, and that's very clear from the front end, is that we include caregivers in a very structured way. We have a separate intake just for them. And it's not about talking about the teen and venting all their concerns for the teen. It's understanding how is your experience of parenting your teen? What is that like for you emotionally? How much of your day is taken up by that? How do you respond? How skillful is that? How well do you manage your own emotions? We're looking for skills deficits because we know all parents are doing the best that they can. And at the same time, they may need to learn different skills to parent their fire feeler, their highly sensitive or, deeply feeling teenager that's different than other siblings or other relationships in their life. And those are the skills that we want to understand how to teach them. And then keeping parents and teens separate, we've found that one of the most powerful parts of that is actually not for the teens, but for the parents, because they get a space where they can process their grief. This is not the parenting journey I imagine. This is the parenting journey I have, and I'm not alone in that.
For many parents, they maybe have either had that vision in their head or dream of how it's going to be. And I have my 5-year-old daughter, and she's going to be my little bestie for the rest of my life, right? And all of these things. Or they've raised children before, and maybe that child has older siblings and that is how it went. And so there is a lot of identity that can come up when it comes to parents saying, oh, I'm losing a piece of who I thought I was as a parent, which is a huge piece of who I thought I was as a person. And so if we've had 2 children already and they did not trigger certain things in us. And so we haven't seen ourselves have those reactions or responses to our child before. And then we have a child that's different from the other 2. And so they express those, they might even have the same feelings, or they might be reacting to the exact same stimulus within the household, but they're going to experience it and express it in a different way. And so as a parent, we might go, oh, who am I now, right? As a parent to this child, that's not the reaction I usually have. That's not the response I usually have. So I love that idea of being in group together and knowing that no, we're not alone in that, and that it's not a reflection. So many times as parents, our children are. It's very easy to think of them or see them as a mirror, and see ourselves reflected in what they do or how they act, and breaking that connection between the two is so important. What about siblings? As we're talking about siblings, what about siblings? Are they involved in this process? And do they get support there at the center as well?
It's a great question, and I would say they can. It's not a structured part of our program, but we do see all kinds of siblings. We see the siblings that are struggling, the ones that are self-destructive, and on the other side of that spectrum, we see the siblings that are the quote-unquote good child, the one who feels like they have to keep it all together because they have another sibling who's, not keeping it together, falling apart, or having a lot of high needs that require more from parents. And so it is important that we recognize that there isn't one identified client, one identified child that's struggling, that it is everyone in the system struggling to maintain whatever's happening in the home.
And how long are people typically clients at your center? Is it ongoing for a long time, or is it usually like shorter?
Yeah, so I'm of the belief that especially in the teen years, it's really helpful for teens to learn how to use the skills to be autonomous, independent, fulfilled adults. And our job is to help them on that journey and not keep them dependent on therapy as a way to do that. Not that therapy can't be a tool that's used throughout their lives. I think that's really beneficial, but that when they get to a point that they feel good, that they can pause and try things out without needing to come in weekly to keep talking about it or working on it. So our program is a 6-month program. It's individual and group for 6 months, and the parent group is 12 weeks of that 6 months. I would say most of our clients stop self-harming, engaging in suicidal behaviors by the end of their 2nd month. They complete a 6-month round, and then 60 to 80% of them will complete a 2nd round that's more like a let's reinforce and generalize everything that you've been working on. So you don't have to think so much about it. It becomes automatic. It becomes part of the fabric of your everyday without having to really work hard to get there. And so by the end of that 1st year, they typically do graduate out of therapy, maybe come in for check-ins or boosters, but aren't coming in consistently.
Yeah, and some of the symptomology that you're working with teens that are high risk are just suicidal ideation and suicidal attempts, and so sometimes I think even within the counseling profession, there's kind of a taboo about that. There's a feeling of, when do I know how frequently I can talk about this with my client, right? How do I know, and how do I normalize that conversation with the family and with the parents, and how do I help the parents or the guardians to also normalize that conversation, because it can feel kind of taboo in families to, like, well, I don't want to bring it up, right? But I also want to check in with my child. So how do you help families to navigate that, and how do you help your providers also to navigate that?
Yeah, so with families, I review with them, and my team will review with them the same thing that we talked about here on the podcast about a teen is on fire with their emotions, and here's actually the solution to that. So we have this premise that problems are actually solutions, that your teen's brain is being really resourceful and trying to cope, and this is actually their way of trying to stay in life and trying to cope and get through. So we're shifting that perspective for parents of course, we want to change these behaviors, but we also need to change the conditions that are happening with the teen and around the teen so that these behaviors are no longer necessary. And that's the process that we're working on in therapy. One thing that I will teach parents of the teens that I work with is how to do a basic safety assessment. And I'll say, you need to be able to say the words. You need to be able to speak directly and say things like, do you want to die? Are you thinking about harming yourself, cutting yourself? Because if you can't say those words to your teen, how are they going to feel safe or comfortable saying yes, or that they are to you? So that's part of our education process with parents, is managing their tone, their face, their pace, not jumping in frantically because they're anxious. And of course they're anxious. I'm not saying don't be anxious, but learning how to slow down and regulate to show teens that There's nothing that you can say that will freak me out. Of course, I'll be worried and scared because I love you, but I can be the stable force so that you don't have to feel like you need to manage my emotions when you're the one who's really struggling. And then with my providers, we have a whole structured program for intensively training them. I actually train my team in that program. I train therapists all over the world in the program, but it's our way of treating high-risk teens so that they can assess behaviors, understand the root of behaviors, learn the right skills to treat and intervene on those behaviors, and teach caregivers how to be a part of that process.
Well, and that brings up a good point too. When clients like even start services with you, is it typically the parent who sought it out because the child confronted them and told them that they were having these behaviors? Or is, I mean, I'm sure it's all different walks of life, but what's the typical reason where somebody would come into your center?
I would say it's a mix of both. So the caregiver is typically the one that's calling in and speaking to our intake coordinator. And in that very first session, we are including caregiver or caregivers and teenager at the onset to get on the same page with everyone about why they're there. But we do have a lot of teenagers that will say, I'm struggling and I want to talk to someone, and parent will support them in that process. So they're aware from the start that teen is struggling, and they're a part from the very beginning.
And so if somebody is thinking about getting services for their child as well, sometimes there are questions about, well, okay, how involved am I going to be in what that child describes or that teenager discloses in those sessions? You know, as parents, it can be very tempting to want, especially if we feel that our child is in danger, to want to have control over the situation. We want to know everything, right? But at the same time, children and teenagers need some autonomy as well in their services. So how do you describe that to parents, and how do you help them understand the balance of that?
Right from the very beginning. So I think there's a common misconception that information is going to help you control the situation. And that's what parents come in with. And of course, that makes sense because uncertainty about your kid's safety is a very scary place to be. But it's actually not more information that's helpful. It's learning your own skills and how to respond that's going to change the dynamic and how the story plays out at home. So we do two sides. We review confidentiality with teen and parent present. In Pennsylvania, confidentiality starts at 14, but what we'll share is that we will not disclose any literal content to parents that teen is working on in therapy, but we might share themes. We might say things like we're working on coping skills or we're working on self-esteem. And we will also make sure that parents are aware that breaking confidentiality is for imminent risk. So it is things like, if I'm going to leave the office today and hurt myself, we need to bring parent in and safety plan for that. But it's not for, I cut myself 3 weeks ago, or it's not for, I experimented with drugs and alcohol. Like, those are things that have already happened that are not putting the teen at risk. And then we have another side of that, which is our no secrets policy for parents. So, and we explain this with Teen Present as well, is that we will not receive information from parents that we can't share with our teen clients, meaning, like, don't tell me that you read your teen's diary and you found out they're sexually active and you want me to address it with them, but don't tell them that I know that you read their diary. It puts us in a very precarious position when we're building trust and rapport with our clients, and parents understand that once we explain that. And yet that policy came from having to navigate some of those sticky concerns by history.
Yeah, absolutely. And then you did a training with us as well called Stop the Revolving Door: Strategies for Neurodivergent Teens in Crisis. Can you kind of go over maybe warning signs or things that neurodivergent teens versus typical teens might struggle with, and what you kind of go into in that training?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of overlap just in teenagers who I would say are biologically sensitive or feel on fire with big emotions, and neurodivergent teenagers who are sensitive to emotional experiences, experience rejection sensitivity, but also have a lot more vulnerabilities that could lead to these big impulsive behaviors or self-destructive behaviors. And by vulnerabilities, I mean things like sensory overload in their everyday, social struggles that are difficult to navigate, not just at school, but when they get home and in the social media spaces. So some of those and some of the buildup of those things. So I think a lot about kids who go to school 6 hours a day, 5 days a week, and they're in the crowded hallway and they're in the lunchroom with the fluorescent lights and all the background noise, and they have the high demands of the test and the low autonomy to be able to really do anything about changing their environment, and how the buildup of that can lead to having such a lower capacity for coping. So if I think about like a stress cup, that theirs is always at the top. So like the little extra drop that falls in is going to make everything spill out a lot more frequently. So we need to be mindful of that with neurodivergent teens and really understand that bottom-up processing, that they're receiving so much more through their sensory experience that it makes these self-destructive behaviors more likely.
Yeah, school is a lot.
School's a lot.
That's a lot. There's a lot of pressure there, and it's constant, and there's a lot of stimulus there, and it's constant, while being expected to block out that stimulus, right, and do the thing that you're being told to do, and sometimes in very different ways, but in a very fast time frame. And the expectation is do the thing quickly. And a lot of times there isn't room for clarification. There isn't room for requesting context, right? Or getting context. And so for children and teenagers that do have that do feel overwhelmed sometimes when they have so much, I mean, it is a lot. And I have a 9-year-old, and I think about 4th grade, and I go, oh my gosh, like how long could I do that? How long could I be, right, with 20 other children?
I don't think I could do it now. I don't think
I could. It's a lot.
It's a lot.
It's a lot. So, and you talked about rejection sensitivity as well. And I know that comes up a lot with peer interactions at school and with other children. How does that show up in the family relationships? And do you find sometimes that parents also might have rejection sensitivity that they are not aware of, but that might come into that relationship?
Yeah, I mean, I would say in general, when we're going through the process of evaluation and we're looking at the traits of someone who fits criteria for our program, which is being sensitive to your emotional experience, being reactive, like 0 to 60 in 10 seconds flat, taking a long time to calm down after you've been triggered, parents will be like, oh, that's me too. And I'm like, of course it is. At least one of the two parents is probably fitting that criteria as well. So when I think about rejection sensitivity, and I think about someone who is so sensitive and attuned to their environment, it doesn't have to be this big overt experience that creates that shame, sensitivity, physical pain, sadness that comes with that sensitivity of rejection. It could be something like a look. It could be that mom said, did you do your homework? And I said, not yet. And the tone of her voice or the little like squint of her eyes made me interpret that as she's disappointed in me. And then I'm spiraling because of that. So it's these small moments that lead to these big body experiences. And that in itself, I think, is problematic because for the home dynamic, because then it leads to the people who don't have that sensitivity to be like, well, that wasn't that big of a deal. Why are you so upset by that? So again, another experience of invalidation, which then fuels the fire of the emotion and leads us further into these self-destructive behaviors.
Yeah, absolutely. And I heard you mention you used to do play therapy and now work with teens. I'm curious what made you take the leap to work with like a totally different age group?
Yeah, I would say it was a natural progression. I realized that I have a really good knack for connecting with the teen population, and not that I can't, connect with children, but it's where my heart lies. So when I worked in the inpatient and partial hospital program for the beginning of my career, I saw all ages, 5 through 18. And I just found myself gravitating to work with teens, and they kept saying, I wish there was something like this out in the community. And at the time, what I was doing, there wasn't anything like that out in the community. And that's how I started my practice, was recognizing, oh, I'm good at this. I like this. They think this is helpful. Let me create a space where they can continue this work outside of a hospital setting.
Yeah, and can you tell us more about how your program supports those who might have been recently hospitalized or helps prevent those future hospitalizations? How do the two work together?
Yeah. So what I love about our program is that I think it's really targeted to the behaviors that someone has, because when somebody's going into a hospital or coming out of a hospital, they're getting stabilized. Well, when they're in the hospital, they're getting stabilization, right? They're at a place where they're removed from their environment. They're getting stabilized with some general skills in a general population, maybe some med changes, and all of those things may be necessary for where that individual is. But when they come back to a program like ours, or they're in a program like ours, we're working with their target behavior, meaning whatever it is that you're engaging in your life is what we're prioritizing, and we are tailoring treatment around that. So not only do we have our individual sessions where we're understanding those behaviors, working with the caregivers on how to respond to those behaviors, putting the teens in a group where they're practicing new healthy behaviors to shift how they're responding to big emotions, but we also offer something called phone coaching, where if they're in their environment and they're overwhelmed with their emotion, or they're at what we would call like your skills breakdown point, where you know you have the skills, but you're just so overwhelmed, you can't think about them or get yourself to use them, you can reach out to your therapist and get coached into using them. So this could be a phone call, a FaceTime. Sometimes they're not in a space to talk, so it could just be texting. But their therapist has their plan, their action plan for how to use their skills and can coach them through it. So we're actually helping them use those skills in the times when they matter most.
That's awesome. So it's like a crisis call, kind of like in the moment, like if they need somebody there. I mean, if somebody's listening and they're like, okay, so there's groups and there's therapy and there's parent groups, like that could sound overwhelming and a lot. Are people typically like once a week coming there, or how often are these groups and therapy sessions taking place?
So it is 3 separate things. It's an individual session, a teen group, and a parent group. So it really depends on the person's schedule. A lot of our teenagers like having it separate. Let's say group is on Tuesday and individual is on Thursday. So there's multiple touch points in the week. That way they get multiple touch points of support throughout the week, which may be necessary for their level of risk. Our parent group is online, so parents can, one night a week, they come home for 12 weeks and they're able to connect, and multiple, we have grandparents that join, we have parents and aunts, and so it's support people that are supporting the teen, which is a really beautiful thing. But we also have teens that just want to knock it all out in one night. So they'll come to their individual session and they'll go to their group afterwards, and they just have like one long night of treatment. But we always look at the cost benefit analysis. Like, yeah, it is an investment of your time, of, when you have homework and extracurriculars and all these other things. But so is ending up in the hospital. And a lot of our clients have been to the hospital 6 to 10 times before they find our program. So they recognize, I don't want this cycle to continue. I want something different.
And for those extended family members too, that might see that there are challenges happening, but not be close or in the household, how can those family members offer their support?
One of the things that I hear a lot, so I think about a parent who has a teen who's struggling. It's not an easy, let's go out to coffee and chat with a friend type of situation. And it can be very isolating when you're hearing like Grayson is going to college, Susie got the lead in the school play. And you're like, well, my kid's just trying to survive every day and doesn't even want to be alive every day. It's very lonely and it's very isolating. And compounding that is a lot of times the extended family will have a lot of judgments and opinions about what you're quote unquote allowing to happen, or how soft you're being, or any of these other judgments that show up. So if extended family is seeing the struggle, I think the most helpful thing is for them to learn to validate, to say, hey, parent, I see how hard this is for you. Let me be a listening ear for you. Like, I know it's hard. I'm here for you. Want me to come do your laundry? Do you want me to come sit with you? Do you want me to just listen non-judgmentally? But I think assuming that you know how hard it is or what's happening and what's best is very unhelpful unless you're there and you're living it.
And I was looking at your website, you're on fireitsfine.com, and I see that you have a couple like free tools on there, a webinar and a free daily practice log tracker. Can you kind of go over what that is for parents?
Yeah, so the daily practice log tracker, it's actually at the end of the book to download it, because it goes through all of the skills that we review in the book. And it follows the same idea that our groups and our program does, is that skills are only helpful if you're using them and you're held accountable to them. And we ask our teen clients to use a diary card, which is like a daily tracker of what skills you're using and what emotions you have. And so I'm always asking that parents go first. If you're asking your child to do something, then you need to be willing to do it as well. So the daily tracker is available on the website. There's also a free chapter of the book available on the website to see if it resonates with you. But I would encourage that if you're reading it, that it's not just reading and putting on your shelf. It's reading, putting it into action, practicing it, finding an accountability partner, seeking some kind of support so it becomes your reality and not just another book on your shelf.
And how might somebody, so if somebody is not in your location where your center is, but wants to read the book and wants to work through and utilize those strategies, how might you suggest that they incorporate that maybe into the family or individual therapy that they are doing?
Yeah, I would say that these are skills that any therapist can reinforce. So maybe therapist is willing to read the book or bringing those skills into session and talking about how can I apply these in my everyday life. I also train therapists all over on these strategies. And so they can find it on my website, teendbtbook.com. They can find other therapists who are trained in this protocol. So they can absolutely reinforce anything that's being read, learned, used, and help them stay accountable to it.
Awesome. Well, if someone is listening and they are on the fence about starting counseling or getting started with services, what suggestion might you give them?
I think one of the things that I think about a lot is that now is the time to really pave a positive relationship with your teenager. And if you have a teen who's struggling, the most validating thing that you can do is hear them and help them connect to support and learn the skills yourself so you know how to respond to them, because teenagers who don't get validation, teenagers who don't get their needs met, become teenagers who don't come home so often once they leave the house. And so really prioritizing support, relationship, communication, connection, because if not now, you're going to continue to grieve what you wish you had as your teen gets older and more independent.
Wonderful. And any kind of preparatory tips for parents with younger children as they kind of prepare to go into those adolescent years?
Yeah, big question. I think validation first all the time. Your teen or your child falls and skins their knee. Don't say, oh, it's not a big deal. Don't cry. Learn the validation skills when they're little so that you can practice for when they get older. And I would also say prepare for things to change. I see a lot of parents grieving the process of their children becoming more independent, needing them less, because like you said, Julie, it changes who they are and how they see themselves and what that relationship looks like. And so recognizing that things will change and that you get to evolve into a new version of yourself that supports a new version of your child, and that it's hard and wonderful at each step along the way.
Wonderful, wonderful suggestions. So if you're listening, you can find Katie K. May at youronfireitsfine.com. If you're looking for a therapist in your area, teendbtbook.com as well. Great resource there. So Katie, thank you so much for being on the show. Also, Katie has a training on You Need a Training, so youneedatraining.com, and that is strategies for neurodivergent teens in crisis. So a great one, and available for free if you don't need the CEs. So if you're a parent and just interested in learning more, that's a great one to listen to in the car as well. So wonderful information. Thank you so much.
I'm Katie K. May, and I need a counselor.
And I'm Krista Hunt.
And I'm Julie Johnson, and we need a counselor.
And so do you. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to the You Need a Counselor podcast. We are so grateful that you're here. You can also find and connect with You Need a Counselor on Facebook and Instagram. If you've enjoyed today's show, please take a moment to like, review, or leave a comment, as all of these things help others to find and benefit from the podcast as well. If you're in the state of Iowa and interested in mental health counseling or behavioral health intervention services, give us a call at 800-531-4236.